welcome back to VDB. In today's video, I'm going to be editing down a few palettes into smaller, more compact, but I think just as, or honestly more interesting of color stories. So I think the starting place for this video shouldn't be the palettes themselves. It should be the thought process behind how we view palettes. Now, I see two somewhat distinct viewpoints. One is that a palette is a collection of singles. The other is that a palette is a color story. One is selling you solely the product. The other is selling you inspiration, an artistic vision, what have you. Now, I say two different approaches, but of course, I don't think very many people exist on either end of that continuum. I think most of us lie somewhere in the middle. We want something that is inspiring, that's interesting, but we would be very upset if we weren't getting something new out of it. You know, I don't care how pretty the color scheme you come up with is. If I have every single one of those shadows in a different palette, I'm good. I'm not going to purchase it. And I think most of us are in the same boat. I do think that the median in the community tends to shift over time. I would say that 10 years ago, we were much more on the side of eyeshadows are just the shade and you mix and match as needed. Now I think so many of us have so much eyeshadow that companies are more and more selling us the color scheme rather than the shadows themselves. They're selling you those interesting combinations. So to appeal to that side of me that's most interested in the combinations of colors, and really, I think color story is a good term. Telling a story, guiding you to interesting new places through color selections. Let's look at a few palettes that are just too big for their own good. Starting with the Glam Light Ice Cream palette, which I'll put up here. Now, I've got my picture, my edited down version in front of me, if you were wondering. Now, to me, at first glance, this is kind of a mess. I mean, it's somehow pastel and bright at the same time, which isn't a bad thing, but I'm kind of lost. We were talking about color stories earlier, and this is full of interesting plot points, but I can't identify a plot thread that really connects all of them. So in this case, I've edited down, what is it, a 30 pan palette into the 12 pan palette you see here. Now this is condensed. It does not go as warm as the original palette does. This very much sticks to pinks, purples, some blues, and it really does stick mostly to the pastels. There is one sort of berry color and a gold, just to give it a little bit more variety and allow you to take it in a not quite neutral, but almost. You could wear some of these combinations to work, which I don't think you could necessarily do with without that gold or the white. So I personally would prefer this. I look at this palette and I know where I would start. I would start with the lightest pink buffed out in my transition area, deepen up the crease with the berry, and then pop one of the shimmers on the lid. I know where to go. And yes, I could eventually get there with the larger palette. Of course I could. I mean, the shades in the smaller are a subset of the shades in the larger. any look you can do with the smaller, you can necessarily do with the larger. However, the smaller, in my mind, helps guide you a little bit more easily to a finished and attractive look. So palette number 2 is again from Glam. I just don't like Glamlight's color stories. I think the moral of this story, in this case, their cake palette is sort of a bright rainbow. And there's nothing wrong with that, but as I have said before, and I will link it up in the cards there or there, I don't really remember which part of the screen it takes up, I don't really like rainbow palettes. I don't find that they really guide me the way that I need to be guided. So I just look at this and I blank. It's like I'm getting in front of a group of people and giving a speech. I am getting in front of a group of people and talking. You're just not physically here. Right now you look like a ring light and my phone. So, bad example, but I really feel like I'm being put on the spot when I look at this to come up with something from nothing. Now, I've condensed this down from 20 shades to 10. In general, I tried to keep with about half the shades in the palettes. And now I have got not quite the rainbow. I'm missing a green, but I do have red, orange, yellow, pink, blue, and what I would consider 3 different takes on purple in this palette. Again, I kept that one neutral. The shade that in the original palette is called Cinnamon. And I sort of put that in the middle of the palette to join the warm side and the cool side. The idea being you could get an entirely warm look, you can get an entirely cool look, or using that cinnamon and, to a slightly lesser extent, the red shade, which is Red Velvet from the original palette. You can marry the 2 sides to get more options, more possibilities. Again, I've taken something that I have no idea what to do with, a giant rainbow palette that's shaped like a cake, which I don't understand the food palette thing, but that's fine, it doesn't matter, and compressed it into something that I do know what I would do with. And I think that if I owned this palette, I would use this quite a bit. I think I would use every shade in this palette versus the larger, which I think I would have to force myself to get use out of these shades. Today, though, you know, if people like this video, I could, there are some brands that I could probably do this for every single one of their palettes because they just don't do a good job of editing themselves. One of those could potentially be P. Louise. This is their Worldy palette. And again, it's a rainbow. It goes both from sort of a bright rainbow with on the left side to a more grungy set of colors that's not a full rainbow on the right. Now, this might just be my bias, but I don't think that adding that rainbow element really adds a whole lot. At least the looks that I would do, I would either stick to solely to the right side of the palette, or I would or I would just stick to the right side of the palette. That's what would happen. So what I did is edit this down from 7 times 3 is 21 shades to 9. And this is still just a very dark, grungy color story. The inspiration that I was thinking of, and I don't know if this comes across at all, but I was thinking like Morocco after dusk. Have I been to Morocco? No. Do I feel like this is the right color scheme to portray the vibe that I have in my mind of what Morocco in the evening would be like? Yes. If you've been to Morocco, let me know. I'm very interested. But I wanted to keep the most interesting shades in the palette, which were, to me, these darker, grungier takes on teal and blue. And I did want to keep that contrast that they had with the orange and that brighter purple, and have sort of anchors for those interesting combinations, those interesting contrasts of grunge and bright, by incorporating the reddish brown and the sort of greeny bronze shades. For our next element on the list, we move to Colourpop and the It's All Good palette, which is really low-hanging fruit, joke of a name, but what works for you, Colourpop? I'm glad it makes you happy. Now in this case, we are cutting this palette down to 40% of its original size, and I don't think we're really losing practically anything. This one doesn't have any pressed glitters, which we can get into that some other time. But yeah, you can still do your pink looks, you can still do your purple looks, you've got the yellow, browns, pop of silver. I don't know why they thought this needed to be a, what is it, 30 pan palette? Yeah. Yep. We have achieved with 12 shades what they tried to sell you for 30. So I think they should take, what is it, like $17 off the price tag for us? Get right on that, Colourpop. Much appreciated. Next, we move to BH Cosmetics. This is the Love in London palette, and I actually think it's really cute. It's repetitive, certainly, but I appreciate a cool toned palette, fairly neutral, goes a little bit into the plums, actually takes it in kind of an interesting route by adding these somehow cool toned takes on burgundy. Very pretty. Just repetitive. I mean, though, these three shades, Scone, Big Ben, and Cheers, are all the same. They just are. Lolly and Palace, not the same, but too similar to the point where I don't think you could probably see much of a difference when you applied them to the eye. So I've cut down a 16 pan palette into an 8 pan. We still get the blue. I mean, warm tone neutral palettes with a pop of blue are canceled, but cool tone neutral palettes with a pop of blue, we can still talk to them sometimes. I've got the blue, I've got the purple, as well as the quite dark plum, the gray. I love metallic gray eyeshadow. It's probably my favorite color. That was going to stay. And we keep just two basic brown beige shades. Crumpet and what was originally, I actually don't even know. I think it's Big Ben, but Big Ben and Scone are so alike in the picture that I cannot be sure which one I picked when I was editing these down. I don't know. That should be a sign that one of those should have gone. All right, I think this is the last palette. Yes, it is. The Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. This is a neutral palette with a pop of green, although it's really not even that poppy. It was a warm tone neutral palette with a pop before we fully understood what pops were. And before we were all sick of warm neutral palettes. So good on you for getting in there first, Too Faced. I'm very impressed. However, I don't think most of these shades are necessary. In fact, I think about 50% of them would give you a very similar color story. We can keep the green, we can keep this darkest shade, but we don't need too dark purple. We're going to keep some matte brown, a nice array of peach, which is actually kind of missing from the full-size palette. I mean, yes, every shade that is in the smaller palette is in the larger palette. I think we've talked about that with another one. However, having 3, maybe arguably 4 peach shades in a 18 pan palette gives a very different feel than having 3, again, arguably 4 peach shades in a 9 pan palette. For a palette that's called Sweet Peach, I feel like the ratio is better in the smaller version. And yeah, again, we can get pretty much the same looks. I mean, you won't have as much of an option with a transition shade brow bone highlight, but do you really need 3 different options for that? Maybe, but I don't. And I think that keeping it to 1 keeps this streamlined, keeps it easy, and it guides you a little bit more in the direction of a look than I feel that the bigger one does. Well, I think that's it for palettes. Let me know what you think of this look. I'm kind of torn about whether I like it or whether I look like a witch teacher from a bad American knockoff version of Harry Potter that's not paying J.K. Rowling any royalties, or both, because I guess those aren't mutually exclusive. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing if you did. I'd love to see you next time. But until then,